Monsieur Fisher's end was unfortunate. This old servant, who had kept house for General Bonaparte from the early days of the army in Italy, disappeared in 1809 during the march from Ratisbon to Braunau, April 26th. He was believed to have been assassinated or taken prisoner. The emperor asked for his return from the Austrians in vain. He was finally found in the woods of Landshut, alive, but in a complete state of dementia. He survived only a short time. His successor, Monsieur Colin, underwent all the trials of the final campaigns and the catastrophe which followed. He is, by an honorable exception, the only one of the stewards and butlers of the time who was not rich. Napoleon gave birth to miracles around him. The responsibility of serving at table was of a delicate nature. However, I have never heard concerns over poisoning or extraordinary precautions discussed. The best protection was found in the devotion of the chefs and in the good order that prevailed. The Grand Marshal of the palace reviewed everything. As for Napoleon, full of confidence in his servants, he entrusted his life to them as if he had never even thought of danger. The emperor's dinner lasted no more than 15 to 20 minutes. There were two other tables, that of the greater officers and that of the lesser officers. This is what they were called in normal speech, and I keep this designation because it indicates clearly the two large hierarchical divisions of the household. The table of the greater officers was supposed to be headed by the Grand Marshal. In his absence, the Grand Equerry, or the staff aide-de-camp, took his place. The ladies of the palace, the chamberlains, the prefects, the equerry, the generals of the guard, all the first salon were served here. This table was served first so that they could be in the salon when the emperor entered. There were two private tables as an offshoot of this one, that where the Grand Marshal had his household served, and that which the emperor had established in 1806 for his secretaries. These last did not sit at the greater officers' table unless it was impossible to serve them separately. Due to some difficulty in travel arrangements, their duties in the inner rooms barely allowed them to arrive at the moment when dinner ended, and in any case, the emperor did not like to have them exposed to palace conversation. Their personal table was headed by Meneval in his absence, and following him by Fain, the command secretary Deschamps, Baron Mounier, and Colonel Bachelor d'Alba were the first table companions. Messieurs de Ponton, Lelorgne, de Ville, Prevost, Chouin, and Rumigny were admitted one by one. In addition, this table hosted two dining companions outside of the cabinet who, by the emperor's personal preference, sat there rather than at the greater table. Baron Ivan, the regular surgeon, and Lieutenant Colonel Gourgaud, when the title of first ordnance officer placed him on an unequal footing with his comrades. Another table was set up for the imperial reader and the empress's red ladies. This was what one called the ladies who had been chosen in the imperial households of Écouen and Saint-Denis to preside over the service. In the apartment of the Empress Marie-Louise, they had kept the orange red dress from Saint-Denis, which gave them this name of Red Ladies, but their title was First Ladies in Waiting to the Empress. Two remained constantly in the room next to that where the Empress was, and like the secretaries, they did not go into the outer apartment unless by some chance an errand forced them to leave. The table of lesser officers were headed by a palace quartermaster. It served the ordnance officers, the aides-de-camp of the emperor's aides-de-camp, the pages, the officers of the guard, the doctor, and the surgeon of the district. It was for all those officers of a grade inferior to colonel, or whose rank in the household was only second class. Then came the staff table, which had place settings for the emperor's chamber valets, the empress's chamber ladies, and the butler. But I do not believe I need to go further into these details, and I return to the salon. Chapter 20. The salon and the soiree. Here we are on the chamberlain's terrain. They provide the characters of the tapestry, decorating the room we enter. Their coats are red, embroidered in silver, and most bear a name as striking as their dress. Let us name them. These were the counts: d'Alsace, d'Angers, d'Aubusson, de la Feuillade, Gaillard de Béarn, de Beaumont, de Bouvin, Talipied de Bondy, de Brancas, de Brigode, Auguste de Chabot, de Kegarou, de la Brief, de la Casas, de la Stigue, de Lillier, de Louvois, de Contades, de Saint-Simon, Courtomay, de Courier, de Delot, du Manoir, du Saillant, de l'Ursalus Germain, Charles de Gontau, de Gramont, d'Aussonville, de Choiseul-Praslin, Songy, de Ponge, de Remoussat, de Rambuteau, de Saint-Aulaire, Auguste de Talleyrand, Baron, de Lostanges, de Marmillet, Georges de Metin, de Miramont, de Montau, Triomphe, de Montalembert, de Montaigu. And I am not reading all these names. The emperor, on leaving the table, found gathered in the empress's sitting rooms the various persons composing her daily society. They were regularly the maid of honor, the Duchess de Montebello, as well as the ladies and officers of the palace who were on duty. Princes and princesses of the family, great dignitaries, marshals, and ministers came and went. Those who were most regular in enjoying the privilege of this entree were the senators Monge, Laplace, Fontaine, and Count de Ségur, Count Châtel, Baron Tenon, etc. If I had to name here all those who, through their rank in the state and the imperial household, were authorized to appear at palace soirees, I would risk repeating a list which is found everywhere. I only claim to mention a few habitués. As for the close friends and regular visitors, there were Prince Berthier, Arch-Chancellor Cambacérès, Marshal Bessières, Duke of Istria, Grand Marshal de Roc, Duke de Friuli, Grand Écurie Caulaincourt, Duke of Vicenza, Secretary of State Murray, Duke de Bassano, Count Montalivet, Minister of the Interior, former aide-de-camp Lavalette, General Lauriston Savary, Duke of Rovigo, Count Caffarelli, General Mouton, Count of Lobau, Champigny, Duke of Cador, Admiral de Craye, Minister of the Navy, and in later years, Count Montesquieu, General Narbonne, Count Bertrand, and General Drouot. Monsieur de Talleyrand is not a man one forgets. If I have not named him, it is because after 1809, the Prince of Benevent, Talleyrand, plunged into the honors of Vice Grand Elector, maintained no more than an appearance of closeness. It was the same with the Duke of Otranto, Fouché, after Savary, Duke of Rovigo, had replaced him at the Ministry of Police. While a circle formed around the Empress, the rest of the salon was divided between gaming tables and personal conversations. The Emperor did not care for gaming. However, he had been known to play a 21 and whist. He preferred chess and billiards. There was a billiard table in the Empress's apartments. If the Emperor found a conversationalist who pleased him, he drew him to a window recess, and a long talk followed. His mind sought out this kind of exercise and relaxation. He knew how to listen. Above all, he enjoyed listening to those who spoke of what they knew well. As he had not always had the time to read, he learned by way of listening and took in what he heard marvelously well in such a way as to make it fresh and something of his own. His conversation sparkled with flashes linked by his originality, his ability to seize 1,000 unexpected connections. A single word caused him to spread his wings. He turned down nothing once he had started. He let fly things one would have feared to hear from any mouth other than his own. He was the ruler who valued secrecy most highly, and yet often he would be pouring out the strangest indiscretions about himself and his plans. He was in conversation as he was at the head of an army, always in motion, at the head, and on the offensive. His faculties were immense, and one might ask if he possessed more spirit than genius. There never passed a day when he didn't say something remarkable. The soiree was normally short, and often the emperor found himself forced to abridge it still more to hold a meeting that the day's crush of business had caused to be put off to 8 in the evening. In this case, it was not unusual that the meeting continued far into the night. At times, the emperor went out, sometimes to spend an hour or two at the theater or the opera, sometimes to take a stroll incognito. In that case, it was usually General Duroc who accompanied him, but at other times, also Marshal Bessières or the aide-de-camp of the household staff. If the soiree remained in the salon, it ended between 9 and 10 o'clock. Napoleon went upstairs then for the coucher, which is to say before retiring to his inner apartment. He received the assembled heads of the household staff to take their orders for the following day. Often, the Secretary of State seized this moment to appear. There would be a telegraphic dispatch to deliver, a final urgent signature to get, or some article for the Moniteur to be reread before sending. The Emperor then went back to his cabinet, glancing quickly through the dispatches he found on the pedestal table, signing what he could not delay and putting off the rest till tomorrow, he would say. The night brings counsel. At 10 o'clock, he was almost always in bed. Such was the routine of Napoleon's days, if you could use this term for the way of life of a man who seemed to enjoy staving off routine as soon as he saw it coming. Let us complete this glimpse with parallel. Men, much more than events, are known through comparison. That was Plutarch's system. Unfortunately, history has really offered us interior views. I see only a day of Frederick's, which, without leaving our modern times, may be placed alongside a day of Napoleon's. Frederick the Great arose in summer at 4 o'clock and in winter at 5. All the letters that each of his subjects might write him, all the petitions or documents which arrived during the night were before him on a table. He opened everything, looked through everything. He made 3 piles of these papers. One he responded to immediately. Another was sent out with notes written in the margin in his own hand to ministers, stewards, courts. And the third, which had neither rhyme nor reason, he threw into the fire. Then his cabinet secretaries came. The monarch gave them everything to be sent off at once. Then he got on horseback, went to view his regiments, and received the foreigners who wanted to see him. Next, he went to lunch, where he showed a continual presence of mind and made comments striking in any century for their truth and wisdom. After lunch, the secretaries returned, bringing all the letters whose outlines they had taken that morning to be signed. Between 4 and 5 in the evening, all the day's work was done. And the monarch rested, and this rest consisted of having read to him until dinner time the best writers of the ancients and the moderns, or reading them aloud himself to his reader. A monarch who used his time thus could well demand of his ministers, generals, and officers that none of them waste theirs. Chapter 21, The Week Sunday walks, hunts, and country palaces. If Napoleon feared routine, he loved rules. We have seen that every hour of the day had a purpose. The day of the week had theirs as well. Monday was devoted to administrative councils, Tuesday to Council of State, Wednesday to the Council of Ministers. On Thursday, he held the great levee and meetings on business and public works. Friday, like Tuesday, belonged to the Council of State, and Saturday provided more time for the administrative councils. Sunday was the day of state display. The great apartments and galleries were open. All the court gathered here in full costume for the best possible showing. Rich coats, many-colored costumes, much braid with sashes, decorations, and crosses of every type out in force. But what distinguished this court, it gave it a special flavor, was that in general it was made up of men who, taken individually, had a special usefulness to the state. They did not appear at the palace like courtiers only on Sunday. They had worked all week. This crowd distributed itself into the salons according to the rank assigned each by etiquette. And with Napoleon, etiquette was nothing but order. The princes of the family, the grand officers of the empire, the ministers, ambassadors, and cardinals in the great cabinet, the senators, counselors of state, division generals, and priests in the throne room, the members of the legislative body, the petition masters, auditors, accountants, judges of the Court of Cassation, and brigade generals in the Salon de la Paix. Finally, all the functionaries and officers of a lesser rank in the Salon of the Marshals. The emperor went from one room to another, seeing everyone in turn. The ceremonies and music in the chapel, a ceremonial parade at the Cour du Carrousel, and the diplomatic audience filled the morning to a large extent. The inner cabinet was nearby for the remainder of it. Sometimes following Sunday's audiences, a private council was held to judge pleas for pardon. In the evening was the family dinner where the emperor always had near him his mother, who was called Madame Mère. Finally, the day ended with a tour of the great apartments. If a performance had not attracted all the court to the beautiful theater of the Tuileries, the chapel service, the diplomatic audience, the great parade or display in the carousel, the family dinner, the tour of the great apartments, and the court theater each deserve separate chapters, and certainly they can be found in some of the memoirs of our day. But that subject belongs more to the history of the court than to that of the cabinet. I only pause over what can offer a more complete idea of Napoleon's intense work life, and I pass over the rest. Once or twice a week, the emperor kept the middle of the day clear to take walks, look over construction works, visit establishments, or take the exercise of the hunt. Hunting for him was no more than a way of remaining in the habit of riding horseback and of making long rides. He derived little pleasure from it, but the fatigue. In the military vein, we find again his chief of staff, Berthier, who, under the title of Master of the Hunt, saw to the hunting paraphernalia and directed people and their movements. For Napoleon, every expense had to achieve its goal. The sound management and ability that distinguished all the branches of his household were equally noticeable in this one. Of all the operations set up by Napoleon, it is without doubt the one that the princes of the Restoration found the best managed, because it is the only one I believe they kept intact. The heads of this recreational department were a collection of soldiers and chasseurs who, continually alternating between war campaigns and the hunt, could exchange roles as needed. On his return from the army, General Girardin, the companion and friend more than the aide-de-camp of Berthier, came to take command of the team of rifle huntsmen. In the same way, when the emperor's absences during war interrupted the hunters' horde, they were to be seen one by one putting on the uniforms of ordnance officers and heading for the cannon fire. I remember that during the Spanish War, Baron Tannencourt, captain of the huntsmen, had ridden at full speed from Bayonne to Madrid to carry the emperor's urgent commands to the King of Naples, Joseph. The lieutenant of the hunt, Baron de Bongar, even more often followed the emperor's military family on campaigns. Even old Beautern, the last of King Louis XVI, harquebus bearers, did his stint in the army and earned the Cross of Honor. This good fellow was in the habit of saying to our young scoffers, "Messieurs, the powder of the hunt burns in the army just as well as the powder of war burns in the hunt." I do not want to omit young Devian, page of the hunt. He had begun as a page to the quarter general. The emperor had seen him grow up virtually under his eyes. Having learned that he was not rich, he granted him a small pension out of the privy purse, and it was to assure him a decent future that he had been placed in the service of the hunt. The page of the hunt must know the smallest paths in each forest. When the emperor hunted, Devienne was his faithful guide. From Paris, the emperor could hunt only in the woods of Vincennes, at Boulogne, Meudon, Rancy, and sometimes at Berthier's. in Grosbois. The residents at Saint-Cloud offered him the woods of Boutard and Ville-d'Avray, and nearby the forests of Versailles, Marly, and Saint-Germain. The large huts were reserved for Compiègne, Rambouillet, and Fontainebleau. The emperor liked the countryside, and winters at the Tuileries seemed long to him. As soon as he could see from his windows the chestnut trees in the garden sprout their first leaves, he couldn't wait to have more than one door on the ground floor open so that he could walk out on the lawn and stroll freely down a green path. His impatience was that of a schoolboy. The month of March rarely passed without a trip to Malmaison, at least as long as his marriage to Josephine lasted, and without a complete emigration from the Tuileries to the Émigré Palace. Napoleon's normal residence during good weather was the chateau at Saint-Cloud, so near Paris that there was almost no disruption in work. From Saint-Cloud, the emperor made trips to the Trianon or Rambouillet, but hardly more than a week was spent in these residences whose proportions permitted only short visits. Napoleon was happy to spend times of rest and privacy there. The large court journeys were those to Compiègne and Fontainebleau. Compiègne was completed only at the time of the second marriage. Napoleon called it Marie Louise's house. Fontainebleau had long been the favorite autumn retreat. The court was able to be there in force. Crowds came from Paris on Sunday. There were a chapel, gallery, and theater, just as at the Tuileries and at Saint-Cloud, and in addition the most beautiful forest in France for hunting, walking, and riding horseback in any weather. The season for walking would end at Fontainebleau. After the last fair days at the end of November, Napoleon would return to Paris. The emperor's private life in these different locations was more or less the same as at the Tuileries. The ministers continued to come on Wednesday. The councillors of state only went to Saint-Cloud. Everywhere else, hunting and walking thrived in the hours that the administrative councils, audiences, and state displays had ceased to claim. But the cabinet piled up an excess of correspondence, and only if the weather was gloomy would the emperor stay in. Our only diversion was the work with the Secretary of State. Fortunately, this minister went everywhere with us. He was the cabinet's foremost assistant. The Secretariat of State had its own lodging at Saint-Cloud, Rambouillet, Compiègne, and Fontainebleau. Only at the Trianon did it not take up residence. The other ministers came and went in the course of the week according to the needs of their affairs. However, the Minister of Foreign Relations made an exception for the trips to Compiègne and Fontainebleau, as these two residences included a more extended court establishment. He kept lodging there, as did the Secretary of State. These different residences in which Napoleon spent time outside of Paris but only a minor modification in the return of the Tuileries. But the long journeys and the war campaigns provide us with more variation. What activity, what movement? The Seine and the Gironde, the Rhone and the Saône, the Po and the Tagliamento, the Var and the Mediterranean, the Rhine and the Danube, the Elbe and the Oder, the Vistula and the Niemen, the Ebro and the Douro, the Berestine and the Moscow, each in its turn reflected his image. Chapter 22, Travels within the Empire. Journeys took up a large part of Napoleon's life. His sprints, because the rapidity with which he made them one after another hardly permits them to be given another name for the most part, had to do with the large events of politics and war. But there are others that administrative history can claim. In between war campaigns, Napoleon was always found the time to visit some province of the empire. He seemed to force himself to compensate with kindnesses for all the evil that foreign discord created everywhere. Napoleon, the emperor, wished to see Italy again. Italy, this glorious earth that General Bonaparte had trod under his first steps of his war horse, and he sought this time as a restorer, as a father. He devoted the journeys of 1805 and 1807 entirely to the regeneration of the Italian fatherland. He often went to Lyon. This commercial metropolis had particular claim to his benevolence. Every time he went to Italy, he stopped there. In 1802, the meeting of the Milanese Conference provided him with the opportunity for a special journey during which the first seeds of one of his favorite plants sprouted, the establishment of the imperial residence at Lyon. In 1805, he left the road to Milan to visit county seats in the districts of Champagne, Bourgogne, and Bresse. Rouen saw him inspect its factories in 1802 with Josephine and in 1810 with Marie Louise. He covered the other districts of Normandy in 1811 on the way to Cherbourg. Bologna's flotilla and encampments drew him many times to the districts and coasts of Picardy and Flanders. His headquarters at Pont-de-Brique near Bologna is one of those he inhabited the longest. He visited Belgium 4 times, first in 1803, then in 1804, 1810, and 1811. Brussels, Antwerp, and Ghent were the cities he preferred. He set up an imperial residence at the Chateau Laeken near Brussels. From Belgium, he made a trip in 1804 to the 4 districts of the Rhine, stopping successively at Aix-la-Chapelle, Cologne, Mainz, Koblenz, and Luxembourg. Mainz and Strasbourg were the doors he had to pass through in his wars of the north. He also traveled all the byways of Lorraine, Alsace, and the Palatinate. The frequency of his trips to this border caused him to set up 2 temporary lodgings there, which in the parlance of the court were also called imperial palaces. The Palace of Strasbourg, which Napoleon inhabited for a time in 1805, and in 1809, Marie-Louise stayed there in 1810 when her father was sending her to her spouse, and in 1814 when her father separated her from him, and the Palace of Mainz where Napoleon stayed in 1804, 1806, 1812, and 3 times in 1813. It was from the windows of this palace that he cast his last look on Germany. In the same year, he traveled from south to north and north to south. In less than 1 year, from 1808 to 1809, matters with Spain summoned him 3 times to Bordeaux and Bayonne, and appeared to require his coming back frequently. 2 temporary lodgings were arranged for him in this area. In Bordeaux, it was an establishment which had the title of Imperial Palace. Closer to the border, it was the small chateau of Mirac, pleasantly situated at the gate of Bayonne and already beginning to be well known in the revolutions of the Spanish dynasty. The manor had served as a retreat for the widow of the last Austrian king, when an offspring of the family of Louis XIV came to establish himself at Madrid. Napoleon, having in his turn placed the Spanish scepter in different hands, went to entertain himself with a trip the length of the Pyrenees. He visited the districts of Gers and Ariège. This was in 1808. Next, he went to Toulouse, Montauban, and Rochefort. Moving in this direction, he did not want to approach Paris without casting a consoling glance on the Vendée. He stopped at Nantes and came back along the Loire via Angers and Tours. There still remained Brittany, Auvergne, Languedoc, Dauphiné, and Provence to be traveled. Napoleon had spent part of his youth in these last 2 districts, but the others were completely unknown to him. Events did not permit this journey to take place. Brest was the only arsenal in France that he had not inspected personally. His last pleasure trip was to Holland with Marie-Louise in 1811. We have just summed up nearly all the journeys that Napoleon liked to call administrative travels. Now we will try to give an idea of the manner in which he made them.